1991, and we're here at Lane Place, the home of the Montgomery County Historical Society. This is one of a series of interviews we're doing on videotape of World War II veterans. I'm Bob Wernle, and I'm on the Oral History Committee of the Historical Society. This being the 50th anniversary of World War II, we thought it was appropriate that we interview a number of the veterans who live right here in the Montgomery County area and have some wonderful stories that they could tell about their experiences back in World War II. We feel that these men and women should tell these stories as they would to their own grandchildren. And we're going to give one of the original of the tape. We're going to give to the person who's interviewed. We're going to make 2 copies of the interview, and we're going to place them in the local history room of the Crawfordsville Public Library for the to be loaned out. These tapes are going to be we're claiming copyright ownership of these tapes on behalf of the Montgomery County Historical Society. Now, I'll start out with the person we're going to interview today and ask you, give us your full name.
Raymond E. Swick.
And you're called Bud Swick.
I'm called Bud, yeah, but everybody knows me as Bud.
And when were you born?
I was born December the 23rd, 1922 at Romney.
And who were your parents?
My parents were Raymond and Gladys Swick.
And were you one of several in the family?
There was 10 of us kids in the family, 5 boys and 5 girls.
Did all those boys serve in the service?
No, I was the only one that served during the war, and then I had a younger brother that went in after the war ended.
Mm-hmm. And what was the family background? Was your father a farmer?
He farmed all his life.
And where in the...
in Romney and New Richmond area.
Mm-hmm. Now, where did you go to school?
I went to school at Romney all 12 years, graduated there.
And when did you graduate?
1941.
You were getting pretty close to the time when Pearl Harbor came along.
Right.
And how soon after graduated from high school did you go into the service?
I went into service, I believe it was November the 12th of 42.
And were you drafted?
I enlisted. I knew I would be drafted, but I enlisted at Lafayette.
And where did you go on your first assignment?
Well, I left Lafayette and went to Fort Bend over in Annapolis.
Mm-hmm.
Was there about 3 days, and then left there and went to Atlantic City, New Jersey. That's where they gave you a lot of tests and kind of determined where they were going to send you.
Yes.
And I ended up going to radio school in Chicago.
Whereabouts in Chicago?
I stayed right there in the Stevens Hotel up there in Chicago.
You did? Was that pretty fancy living?
It was for soldiers at that time.
And how long were you in radio school?
It took about 19 weeks to complete the course.
And where did you go after that?
Sent down to Tyndall Field, Florida for gunnery training.
And
was there, that was a 6-week course.
Didn't you ever have basic training?
No, not really. I never went through that. We had our calisthenics. That's about the amount of the basic training that I had.
Mm-hmm. No gunnery or anything like that?
Not until I got into schools.
All right. You were down in Florida, were you?
Right.
And how long were you there?
7 weeks. It was a 6-week course.
Uh-huh. And where were you sent?
Well, I was sent to Salt Lake City. I don't know why, but we was there 2 days, and then from there they sent us to Alamogordo, New Mexico, and that's where our crews were formed. Your pilot.
You were obviously then headed for the Air Force.
Well, I was in the Air Force at the time I went in.
Uh-huh. Did you, I mean, you enlisted in the Air Force?
I enlisted
Is that
in the Air Force.
Okay.
But I didn't know what I'd be doing in the Air Force when I enlisted.
Yeah, all right. So you were out west, and then what happened?
Well, then we was down in LaGuardia about a week, and was sent to Pueblo, Colorado, and that's where we took all of our flight training.
Mm-hmm. And what did they assign you to in your flight training?
I was a radio operator and top turret gunner.
Mm-hmm. When you speak of a radio operator and that training going back into Chicago, what type of training was that?
Well, you learned your Morse code, and you learned the mechanics of the radio, which they was a lot simpler than they are today, you know.
Yeah.
But you had to, in other words, if something happened to your radio, you had to be able to try to fix it if it wasn't something major.
Yeah.
But of course, the main thing was learn the Morse code, because everything was transmitted with the
Dots and dashes.
Yeah, dots and dashes.
Mm-hmm.
And that, you might say, was the kind of radio training you took. And then when you went to Florida and took your gunnery school, you shot all kinds of guns. You started out with a rifle and then a shotgun, and then machine guns, and then you went in, you had to fly and learn to shoot in the air, you know what I mean? They try to get a moving target, and of course, we qualified, then you was a gunner.
All right. So you were qualified as a gunner and a radio operator. All right, carry us on from there.
Well, I went to Pueblo, and there's where we started our flight training, which our crew was all formed, 10 men on the crew, pilot and co-pilot, bombardier and navigator, engineer, radio operator, and then you had 4 registered gunners, which were a tail gunner and 2 waist gunners and a belly gunner.
Mm-hmm.
And we trained in B-24s. After that training, we left for overseas to Europe. And I forget the date we got over there, but it was somewhere around November of '43.
Now, did you fly over to Europe?
Yeah.
Well,
we didn't fly our own plane. We went, at that time, they would put 3 or 4 crews on one plane and fly them over.
And where did you land in Europe?
Landed in Prestwick Island, or Scotland.
Scotland.
Mm-hmm. And then from there, they moved us around until they finally settled on an airfield up there around Greenwich in England.
Oh, in England. Down near London.
Well, it was a good bit north of London.
Uh-huh.
And of course, and that's where we flew out of until we were shot down.
And tell us about this colony of people that of servicemen you were with there north of London. Were they all Americans?
Oh yeah, we was on an air base that was all Americans. We was in the 8th Air Force and the 44th Bomb Group and the 66th Squadron.
And
and on our base was all 24s. Of course, there was air bases all around there, 24s and 17s.
Uh-huh. And how many people were on your base?
Gee, I wouldn't have any idea. There was quite a few.
Did you have any contact with the English? Much contact with them?
Only more or less when you went on a pass or something and go into town.
Uh-huh. When you get a pass to go into town, what town would you go into?
Well, it was Greenwich.
Uh-huh.
I mean, it was a close town, and
Yeah.
you would get a pass and went in on a truck and come back on a truck.
Uh-huh. What kind of entertainment did they have?
Well, about the only entertainment you had then was maybe go in and go to one of the pubs and have some beer, and make sure you didn't drink too much and be able to fly. And you didn't get a pass if you were scheduled to fly the next day.
Uh-huh.
There was only if you had a day or 2 off, and then you got a pass.
Yeah. Now, you were, when did you start doing these, taking these flights, and where did you go?
Well, I don't remember exactly the time of our first flight, but it was somewhere around, as I remember, around the 1st of January. And I know our first mission was at Brunswick.
That would have been in 44.
In 44.
Okay.
And our first mission was to Brunswick, Germany. And I know when we got back, I thought, well, gee, there wasn't much to that. But some of the other boys said, well, just look around. And then we got to counting, we had 167 holes in the plane from flak that we picked up. Nobody got hurt. But, and then we flew, I believe, around 9 missions when we shot up pretty bad and crashed coming back from...
Where were these missions for the most part?
All of them over Germany.
Uh-huh.
Brunswick and Leipzig and Stuttgart, and I don't remember just but we bombed Brunswick, as I remember, about 3 different times. In fact, it was my first mission and my last mission.
What was were you a radio man or a gunner?
I was primarily a radio man. The top turret was manned by either the engineer or the radio operator, whichever one would be free to man it.
Mm-hmm.
And primarily, most of the time, I was at the radio.
Mm-hmm. Now, when you were at the radio, who were you communicating with?
Well, that we sent a message back to England, in, of course, in Morse code.
And what, for instance, were you observing what damage you were doing, and you were reporting that back to England? Was that
part of that, or we didn't really do a whole lot of communication unless you was in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
You had in your formations, you had what you called a lead plane, and it was up to them to do most of the reporting.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, you was always there, and you listened to messages, and if you had to transform a message while you sent it, then that was your job.
Yeah. I'm curious about, when you were on these missions and you were bombing these cities, could you see the damage you were doing as it happened?
If it was clear, sometimes the overcast, that way you wouldn't be able to see so good. They always took photos, but yeah, a lot of times we'd be bombing from 20,000 feet. If it was clear, you could see what you'd done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And sometimes it looked like it'd be pretty devastating.
But you were with really a cluster of planes.
Oh yeah, we'd find formations, 200 to 300 planes in a formation.
Mm-hmm. So you wouldn't know what your plane was doing?
No, you wouldn't know exactly what your own plane done unless you had a camera mounted right on it.
Yeah. Okay. Now, how many missions did you do altogether before you got shot down?
Well, I was on my 13th mission.
And tell us about that. What happened?
Well, that there was, we just got hit over the target pretty bad and lost a couple of our engines, and of course then we couldn't keep up with the formation, and we were just sitting out there by ourselves when the fighters attacked us. And it just all happened all at once, and some of the boys bailed out the back end, and the rest of us, the plane blew up. And some of them were just blowed out, and 2 of them, of course, never made it. They was in the very nose of the plane.
Well, now, did you parachute, or?
Oh yeah, come down parachute.
You came down with a parachute?
We all did. They came down except the 2 that was killed.
And they stayed in and they were blown up?
Yeah, they was, well, I think they might have been killed before the plane even blew up.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
All right, and where did you land?
Well, landed in an area, just an open field. I know as I was coming down, I had the feeling that my parachute wasn't moving. I thought, well, gee, I'm not heavy enough to pull it down. But eventually then you just kind of begin to get a little closer to the ground, and then you had the feeling the ground was coming up to you instead of you going down, see?
Yeah.
But anyway, I only saw one person out in the field. I saw a man with a horse working some ground. But I was knocked out when I hit the ground. I don't know what happened, but when I came to, I was surrounded by a bunch of Dutchmen.
Mm-hmm.
And this young boy grabbed me by the arm, and I couldn't understand the language, but he kept motioning for us to go.
Oh.
And there was a wooded area, and then he turned around and pointed the other way, and there was Germans coming across the field. So I just, naturally thought, well, he wants to help me.
Mm-hmm.
So we run, and That happened about
Now
1
you had
o'clock.
to get disentangled with your parachute though, didn't you?
Oh, well, they took the parachute, the Dutch people, and hit it.
Oh,
And, but we run to this woods, and of course I had my flying suit on. It was electric flying suit. I mean, it's wired, you know, to keep you warm. And I had to take that off. That was on over other clothes, but hide it in that woods so it wouldn't be quite so easy to
spot.
right. And but anyway, shut down at about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and we was on the move until 9 o'clock at night, and he took me to a farmhouse.
With this boy?
Yeah. And in and out of woods and hiding, you know, as we went, and going across canals and cattle troughs, anything that we could get across the canal on. And it was 9 o'clock that evening when we got to this farmhouse, and I got something to eat and stayed there all night. And
Now, did you have, were people there to greet you when you were?
oh no, they didn't. They was completely strangers. They didn't.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they just took me in and gave me something to eat and a place to sleep that night.
Mm-hmm.
And the next day they took me and hid me in a shed that was a little ways from the house. And I stayed there for 2 days. And then 2 men from the underground come and got me.
Mm-hmm. Who were they?
Well, one of them name was, at the time I didn't know their name. They didn't tell you their names. They had code names, but one was called Red and the other was called Little Mouse. But later on I found out their names, and one of them was Johannes ter Hirsch, and the other one was Gerhard Schoenman, which later on were killed fighting for the resistance movement. But anyway, then they took me, and from there on I was on the move from different times. Stay one place maybe 2 days, another place a week, maybe another place 2 weeks, just any place that they could hide me and kept me on the move to keep me being captured.
Mm-hmm. Well, did you see any other people as you moved along? Or were they, I mean, would they take you into a home and introduce you to the people, or
Only the people that lived there.
Mm-hmm.
Even then, later I stayed at a place for 7 months in the hay mow of their barn, and there was 3 boys and 3 girls still living there with their father, who was an invalid. And they had 2 married sisters and 2 married brothers that lived within about 1.5 miles. And only one of the married brothers, I knew I was there, but he worked with the underground, and he's the one that originally took me there.
Mm-hmm.
And their other brothers and sisters didn't know I stayed there all during that time till after the war was over.
Is that right there?
Well, it wasn't a case. You had to be careful who you told.
Uh-huh.
They weren't afraid of their brothers or sisters telling. It's just that they could have let it slip out.
Yeah.
And so that's the way they operated, the underground operated. Well, they didn't tell nobody, and most of the people, I never knew their names, because they didn't want me to know their names, because if I'd have got caught,
Mm-hmm.
the chance that I could say where I was at.
Yeah.
But in 55, when I went back after I got liberated and went back in 1955, well, I started at the last place where I stayed and just kept going and going until I found this first boy that helped me.
And he was still alive?
Oh, yeah, and then I visited him twice since, but he's passed away now.
Did these 2 fellows from the underground, did they keep in touch with you all during this time?
No, part of the time, the biggest part of the time, probably the first 4 or 5 months.
Mm-hmm.
And then you kind of got moved into a different district, and you was with other leaders of the underground.
Could you tell us where in Holland this was? Of course, we don't...
Well, it was around the central part of Holland. I was shot down. It was about near a little town by the name of Nieuwleusen.
How do you spell it?
Oh, don't ask me how to spell
Well,
it.
pronounce it again for us.
Nieuwleusen.
Nieuwleusen.
And, well, I think it's spelled N-E-W and then L-E-U-Z-E-N, something like that. And that was only about 15 miles from the German border.
Uh-huh.
And in fact, I stayed in a lot of towns right next to the German border. But then I was in any number of towns, but it was best to keep me in farms where they had something to eat.
Mm.
People where just didn't have nothing to eat.
Yeah, no, they did, but they, on the farms, they obviously had something.
Well, they lived on potatoes and bread and cheese.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Of course, they raised it, and that way they had food to eat.
and I suppose you had milk.
Oh yeah, they had plenty of milk.
Yeah. All right, now, you're in this barn, in the hay mow, is that it?
All right.
And you're there for 7
months.
7 months. Staying in one place for 7 months.
Yeah, they made a kind of a room out of bale straw and then covered it over with hay. And there was air vents in them barns, and you had to have a ladder to go up that air vent and then to get into the room.
Uh-huh.
And now I got out some because being a farmer, born and raised on the farm, and they'd get me up early in the morning, and when the cows was in the morning, I could help milk. And I like to do that, give me something to do.
Yeah.
And but other than that, I stayed right there in the barn, and they'd bring meals to us.
Uh-huh.
And
Do you eat 3 meals a day?
yes, you had 3 meals a day.
Uh-huh.
Most of it was bread,
Yeah.
bread and cheese, but then you didn't go hungry.
Uh-huh.
At their place, now other place I stayed, you didn't get much to eat because like if you's in town, they just didn't have it.
What towns did you stay in? Do you remember any of those towns?
Oh yeah, there was Enskede and Almelo and Hangelo and
Go a little slower on these. Those names.
I stayed at Heidelbergen, Hayton, and then there was a new Hayton. It was like they're 2 little towns together, but they're different families. Gee, I just can't remember more. I stayed at Arnhem.
Arnhem?
Yeah, that's where that big battle of when they got paratroopers in there, and Nijmegen, where that bridge that they made a film of.
And this was before that happened?
Before that happened, yes.
But you were there?
I'd been in both those towns.
Mm-hmm.
And Beerseville, Swalla, Omen, Utrecht. That was the town with a big university in it. Gee, offhand,
When you were in Utrecht, where were you? In an apartment or something?
just a house with a minister.
Uh-huh.
And I was only there 2 days, but like I said, they just didn't have facilities to hide you, what I mean, to be safe, see.
Mm-hmm.
Because if any of these people had been caught with me there, I mean, I don't know what might happen to me, whether I'd been just taken as a prisoner or what, but those people would have been killed.
Now, you knew this fellow was a minister. Did you know any of those other people, what they were, as you passed along?
Well, yeah, so to speak, because first, in one place in Enskede I stayed, this fellow had a tobacco shop.
Mm-hmm.
That's all he sold was like cigarettes, pipe tobacco, pipes, that kind of, anything to do with tobacco.
Yeah.
And that was all the business he had.
Mm-hmm.
And their business would be in the front room of their house.
Uh-huh.
Another place they sold pastries. Their business was always in the front room of their house. I mean, that's the way they operated. Well, they didn't have a store and they lived somewhere else.
Yeah.
And so from that, I kind of knew what they'd done, see.
Yeah.
Now, I stayed at it was a Dutch policeman's house for 2 nights.
Uh-huh.
And but most of the time they tried to keep me on farms because there was where the food was.
Now, I presume, Bud, that you'd be moved at night, would you?
Sometimes it'd be moved in the daytime.
Uh-huh.
But of course, you always took the back way. You didn't go down the main part of town.
Yeah. Okay, I guess we're in this haystack then, and tell us what happened after that.
Well, it was last day of February in 45 when the Germans surrounded the barn and started shooting at us. And at that time there was 5 other American boys there with me, and another Dutchman who was underground was hiding out from the Germans. And we just managed to get away. We had a lot of firearms and hand grenades that we'd gotten from the underground, and just more or less fought our way out of that, and we escaped that, but except one of the girls was captured, the youngest girl of the family, and their father, who was an invalid. And this Dutchman who was hiding out there. And after that, they shot the Dutchman, and the father, they let him go because he was an invalid, and the daughter, they kept her for about 3 weeks, and then they released her in hoping that her brothers would come to see her, and then they could capture them. But they were smart enough not to do that. Of course, they had to hide out there in different places till the war ended in April.
April, yeah.
And then us, all the rest of us got separated. I mean, we just...
Now these other Americans that were with you, how did they wind up with you? Were they hidden? Were they doing the same thing you were?
Yeah, they was shot down over there. Some of them was rescued by the Dutch and brought there, and 2 of them I helped rescue myself. And at that particular time, that's before we stayed in that barn, that we had a place in the woods that we was hiding out. And just a big hole in the ground we had covered up, and that's where we were staying, and we was there for about 2 weeks. But after these guys were shot down not very far from us, we had to leave because the Germans found the place. And then that's when we went to this barn where we stayed for 7 months.
Now, were those other fellows with you for 7 months too?
Yeah. And, well, yeah, they was there, let's see, all but 2 of them, and they came about 2 weeks later.
Pretty hard to hide that many people.
Well, we was all there in that one little room, just big enough to lay down and sit up in.
Well, what would you do during the daytime, or what would you do?
Just sit there and talk and argue.
Would you? They all spoke English then.
Yeah.
Were you learning a little Dutch as you went along?
Oh yeah, I learned to be able to speak Dutch pretty well, and I could understand them, and they could understand me.
Were you assisting the underground at all when you were up in that barn?
Some. I done most of it after that and before that.
Well, in what way were you assisting them?
Well, in one instance where we went and blew up a boat that we thought was carrying ammunition, and it ended up being carrying potatoes. But then another time when I was staying in Enschede with these other 2 gentlemen that was later killed, we went and robbed an office where they had, we thought they food stamps. But they ended up being tobacco stamps, so we didn't get any food stamps, but we got a lot of tobacco stamps. And then after I left this barn, when we were separated, I mean, we just routed out of there, and we had to find a place to stay, and finally hooked up with other members of the underground, and then that's when, towards the tail end of the war, we were blowing up bridges and
You were blowing up bridges?
And shooting German cars, anything we could find when they was on the move, and that's kind of the work that we done. You had to be careful because when you done something in a little town, the Germans would come into that town and take reprisals on the innocent people who had nothing to do with it. So
I'm curious too about, you say the Germans surrounded this barn and shot the place up. How did you escape? Or how did all of you escape?
Mainly because we had these, the hand grenades was the thing that got us out. Of course, it was a moonlight night, I remember that. And it was about 11 o'clock at night. I know we was asleep when it started. But we was rousted out, and we just started We could see them out there. Of course, this was a brick building. All the buildings over are brick. But anyway, we opened doors and started throwing hand grenades out. Well, then they started to scatter. So then we lined up, and there was, of course, two of the boys of this family who slept in the same room with us at night. They stayed in there.
Oh.
Because they had to kind of hide out from the Germans too. But anyway, we just lined up, and as we was going out the door, made up the first guy threw a hand grenade to the right, and the second guy to the left. And we done that as we ran out the door.
Yeah.
And that way we got away. Now, we evidently just scared them enough that they retreated enough that they couldn't
catch us. Yeah. Where'd you go after that?
Well, that's when we all got separated, and I happened to run across a couple of Dutch boys, and they took me to another place, and they only kept me there a few hours because they was afraid, but they got hold of somebody. Anyway, a young girl come and got me, and that's the place where I went to stay with. There was a schoolmaster. And I was there a couple of weeks, and then they had to move me again, and from there at the end of the war, it was about every week or so I had to move. And finally I was down in south central part of Holland when I was liberated, and I was liberated by the Canadians.
Tell us about some of those exploits you had after you got out of the barn. What you did.
Well, that's when you done about anything you could do to survive. I mean, well, that same night, with all the fighting and everything going on around the barn, there was two Dutchmen that was captured. I didn't know them before then, but they were staying at the house down the road. And but we saw them coming down the road with their hands up in the air. We didn't know who they were, but we just saw two guys with their hands up in the air and another guy behind them, so we knew that they'd been captured. So I didn't do it, but one of the other boys cut loose with his machine gun and nailed the German that was guarding them, and they was able to get away, and they came over where we was at. And then one of them, we got separated, but one of them took me to this house where I stayed just a few hours, and then was taken to this other place, but and that was the last time I saw him. But when I went back in '55, I met him. They did survive. They survived the war. And but then I went and I helped a Dutchman who was sending messages back to England, and that's where I pedaled a bicycle for him to generate electricity for him to power his radio.
And he was a Dutchman?
Oh yeah, he was a Dutchman. Had been trained in England and dropped back in the parachute to do that work.
And was it a stationary bicycle? Is that what it was?
Yeah, just a stationary bicycle, and had another generator on the wheel. When you turn the wheel, that generator created fire. And
how long did you stay with him? Or?
Just about 3 days.
And of course, he was, by that time you were fluent in Dutch, so you knew.
Oh yeah, we could speak pretty good. Of course, he could speak English too. And see, when I left him,
did your radio training do you any good on that job?
Well, they wouldn't let me use the radio, and they wouldn't send a message back to England that I was all right, because they didn't know whether the messages would be intercepted or not.
Yeah.
And but they did send messages. Now, how many reached, got to England and done any good, I don't know. But then that was his job to do.
Yeah. Okay.
And he was to report as much as he could the troop movement and this and that of the Germans. See, and then I stayed. Well, just so happened that place where I was at with him, sending the radio messages, is where the Canadians came up through there and captured that and settled there one night. And I was about 2 miles from there. And the Dutch people where I was staying took me over there, and that's how I come in contact with Canadians to be liberated.
When were you liberated?
On the 13th of April, 1945.
just before the end of the war.
just before the end of the war.
And now, were you conscious of the German forces around? Could you tell anything about their size or their movements or anything like that?
Well, no, you couldn't, they was around you all the time. It was constant, Germans, SS and the Green Police troops, all over the territory because they had to keep the Dutchmen in line too, see what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But actually, as the fighting troops, you didn't see too many of them.
Mm-hmm.
But now I wasn't too far from one of them places where they shot off those V2s and V1 rockets.
Yeah.
And that buzz bomb that they had.
Yeah.
I could see them go over when they first shot them off.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, they would never get proved to be very accurate, but they had those. And but then the latter few days, is right after that, the latter few days as I was over there, that's when we went around and blew up a lot of bridges and would shoot up police cars as they was going down the road and that kind of stuff.
What, you've blown up bridges, you do that at night?
Oh yeah, yeah. Sneak out at night. And they weren't now these big bridges. They were just smaller bridges that went across canals, and they weren't. We never really got into what you'd call a major bridge. Of course, the fact that the Allies didn't want the major bridges blown up.
Yeah.
But what we was doing was just making it rough for the Germans to retreat.
Now you speak of we. Who were we?
Well, I and the Dutchman that was in the underground.
Mm-hmm. Were there any other Americans working with you?
No, not at
just you.
Just myself.
Okay. Now why don't we take a little break here, Mike, and I asked you the question while we were in the recess here about your clothes. Tell us about that.
Well,
how did you drop your uniform, or what did you do with it?
Well, part of it I had to take off right away. It was an electrical suit that you wore, and over your other clothes. And I got rid of it right away and hid it in this woods. And then it was about 2 days after I was in Holland where they took me to a place, and it was a minister's house, and he gave me a suit of clothes and a pair of wooden shoes. Of course, you had to wear wooden shoes, or that's about all they had.
Mm-hmm.
Now, they did have leather shoes, but I mean, very, very few people had leather shoes.
Yeah.
And what they had was, I mean, old shoes. They weren't nothing that they could get during the war. But your clothes were supplied like through the underground, where you they even had ways of getting clothes for you.
You were used clothing that somebody else.
Used clothing, but you didn't worry about that. You were just glad to get anything for help.
Yeah.
And,
you mentioned the shirts. Tell us about those shirts.
Well, the shirts, I can remember when I was a kid, my dad wore shirts that you had removable collars and cuffs on them, but they just buttoned on there, because that was your collar and your cuffs on your arms were what got dirty the quickest, you know what I mean? And you could remove them and wash them. And maybe you'd wear the shirt for 2 or 3 weeks, but you could get your collar washed, and that looked like you had on a clean shirt.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of clothes you had, see. And then, of course, later then, I got the coveralls. You wore coveralls all the time. While you wore suited
like
clothes.
farmer's clothes?
Yeah, farmer's clothes. They were just plain blue coveralls. And
not Oshkosh like us.
No, they weren't. But that's how you got your clothes. People from stores would come and trade the farm people for food, and maybe they run a clothing store. They'd bring a pair of coveralls and trade for a small sack of potatoes, or half a gallon of milk, or whatever they could get for them. And of course, they didn't tell them that they was getting the clothes for me, but maybe that's how they get clothes.
No.
And I know I had a pair of socks over there that had been darned. They would darn them, wear a hole in them, and they'd re-darn them, the girls would. And they would just patch over and over again. The soles might have been a ½ inch thick on them, because they would just re-darned over and over and over. And of because after you had to repair it, you just couldn't get new all the time.
Now, there were a couple of little funny incidents you told us about the rabbit, for example.
Oh, well, we were staying in the woods at this particular time. There was 3 Dutch boys and 4 of us American flyers had been shot down. And it wasn't a cabin. What it was, we had a big hole dug in the ground and covered over with brush, and that's where we stayed. We could get out, but we could move a limb and crawl out. But I mean, that was. But anyway, we'd been there about 10 days, as I remember, and we really enjoyed it because we was out in the open, more or less. But one day we saw a rabbit running in a hole, so we started digging up to get that rabbit, and we spent the biggest part of the afternoon digging that rabbit out. Finally got it. We was going to have it for dinner the next day. But later that afternoon, an American plane came over that had been shot down or shot up, and parachutes started coming out of it. And it wasn't very far from us, and we went and we rescued 2 of those flyers and brought them back. But the Germans was looking around and looking for them, and we saw them coming. They was getting pretty close to us, so we had to leave, and they found our place where we were staying, so we never got to go back there no more. And we never got to eat the rabbit.
What about you were a smoker, I see. Were you a smoker then?
Oh yes, of course I was smoking when I was shot down, but there in Holland you couldn't get, everything was so rationed that the people that smoked it had stamps, could only get 1 pack of cigarettes every week.
When you robbed the tobacco stamp for those tobacco stamps, you must have had plenty of stamps to buy.
Well, the underground kept them, but the point was you just couldn't go in all at once and buy a bunch of cigarettes because they'd know where you got all their stamps, you know.
Yeah.
You just kind of had to do that kind of gradual. And
now, were those Dutch stamps or German stamps?
They were Dutch stamps, but they was issued by the Germans. I mean, see, the Germans took everything the Dutch people had. They took all their gold and silver, all their money. All they had was just little paper money, and the coins were made out of zinc. They really didn't have any value. And people couldn't buy nothing anyway. I mean, they traded. They didn't pay for things. They had to trade to get things. But it was rough, but we managed to get by.
What did you do for cigarettes?
Well, we'd smoke about anything we could find. Bluegrass hay, you'd be surprised that dry bluegrass, how near it tastes like tobacco when you dry it out. But that was another thing on these 2 boys that we rescued that time. We thought, well, sure, at least we'd get a fresh cigarette, American cigarette. One of them smoked, but he left his cigarettes in the plane, and the other one chewed snuff. And he had a whole can of snuff, a brand new can. So we just took that and we mixed it with some bluegrass and smoked that for cigarettes. As long as it lasted, which that wasn't very long.
Where'd you get the paper to make this?
Well, we used, sometimes we had regular cigarette papers, other times we'd use newspapers. Which that didn't taste very good, but if you want a cigarette real bad, you did use whatever you could get.
Yeah. All right. Now, did you ever see planes flying up above, and you'd think maybe they'd see you down below? Or?
Well, we of course we saw planes every day. Just happened to be where we was staying. I mean, that was just kind of the route that the bombers took every day. We'd count them going over and count them coming back, and we could tell how many they lost. But I know a couple of times we made signs laid out on the ground, that we're Americans, help us, but then I don't know if they probably never saw them or they couldn't help us if they did.
Now, any other amusing incidents that happened there?
Well, there was quite a few. I know one time we went jackrabbit hunting, and that was at night. We'd set snares up where the rabbits run, and then we went out in the field and kind of round them up, you know, that is scare them up and get them to running. And of course, the first one we caught, you could hear him when he hit that wire, you know, and squealing and everything. And I know I went running up there, I was going to grab him so he wouldn't get away. And they kept hollering, "Neat do, neat do." That meant don't do it, you know. And I found out why, because everything kicks, they could break your arm where they kick.
Is that right?
Because they were big, you know. But anyway, we got 2 rabbits that night. And thought, boy, I'll have rabbit for dinner the next day. Well, no rabbit. Went home for 3 or 4 days, and no rabbit. And I knew surely they wouldn't eat the rabbit, and I'd not get any of it, you know.
Yeah.
So I asked them what they done with the rabbit. And, oh, they're down in the cellar. Well, when we're going to eat them? Oh, we eat them. We eat them. And went on about another 3 or 4 days, and still no rabbit. And I kept asking, when are we going to eat the rabbit? And, not ready yet. And I didn't know what they meant by not ready, you know. Well, they took and showed me what they do. They let them lay for 2 weeks before they clean them, and that's the way they done them. After 2
Pretty
weeks.
gamey after 2 weeks.
After 2 weeks. Well, they was down in the cellar where it was cool.
Yeah.
But that's the way they done it, see.
Uh-huh.
And another time we caught a bunch of quail, and we had quail for dinner.
Uh-huh.
Of course, there was a lot of wild game because nobody was allowed to hunt. They had no guns.
Yeah.
Wasn't supposed to have any guns, and the Dutch people didn't, except the resistance movement that they had them from. And of course, you couldn't go out and start shooting at wild game, you know, somebody heard it.
Yeah. You know, but that was, and that's interesting to me. What, you spoke about blowing up those bridges. Where'd you get the ammunition? Where, you must have used dynamite, did you, or how?
No, we used, it was, I'm not too much up on that because I never knew much about explosion, but it was like a putty stuff. Just looked like yellow putty.
Yeah.
And the English dropped this. They're the ones that dropped us guns and hand grenades and ammunition and these explosives and then instructions on how to use it, see. And I know we always used more than we needed because it didn't take a very big ball of that
putty.
That putty to blow up a ship. And but that's what we used. We didn't have dynamite.
Yeah, not blow up a ship. You didn't blow up any ships, did you?
Well, I said ships. It was these big transport boats in the canals.
You did blow up some of those.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's of course all our transportation was done by boats over there. Even before the war, that's how the Dutch transported it, by boats. They didn't have trucks and things like that.
Yeah. Now I noticed in showing us your pictures, but you were ice skating one time.
Yeah, went out ice skating. Most time we done that. We didn't do it very many times, but we go out at night. But this one time they wanted to take pictures, so we went out, slipped out one Sunday afternoon, and got on the ice, and then they took some pictures. And but that's the first and only time I ever ice skated was over in Holland.
What kind of skates did you have?
Well, they had just regular skates that fit on shoes.
Well,
You didn't have the shoe and skate together. It was just a skate that fit on the bottom of your shoe.
But of course, you couldn't put those on the wooden shoes, could you?
Well, you could, yeah. Some of them had to do that. They happened to have an old pair of shoes that fit me that I could put on, and because I couldn't, about all I could do to walk in wooden shoes, let alone ice skate on. But yeah, a lot of people, they'd fasten them ice skates on their wooden shoes.
Yeah.
A lot of times, if they wanted to go someplace, if they wanted to go to town or a little village, which wouldn't be very far, but they'd just go out and get on the canal and skate to town.
Yeah. Now, Bud, is it time that maybe we should get some of your pictures out and your show your medals and so on? Why don't we get those over here?
Well,
I think what we're going to have to do here is, if you can do it, kind of hold this up and go leap through this and tell us about these pictures if you got in your.
Well, you understand, most of these pictures now were taken in '55 when I went back to visit these Dutch people the first time after the war.
All right.
And of course, I went to these places. Now, this gentleman was a father. Here's a place where I stayed for 7 months in the barn, and there was, this is the family now. These 3 girls here and these 3 boys here lived at home with their father, who was an invalid. And but he had died between the war and '55, so I never got back. His fellow says to thank him.
Yeah.
But and then we took these pictures when I went back to visit with them.
All right.
And there it is with me with them, as you can see. And that's really what most of these pictures are, is people when I went back to visit. Now here's one of the girls that was living there that when she got married after the war, she made her wedding dress out of a parachute.
Uh-huh.
And it's all white silk, of course. And they said it was my parachute, but I don't really think it was. But they did make me a scarf, and I've got a scarf at home made out of a parachute.
Uh-huh.
That
the Dutch had made for you.
they made that for me.
Okay.
And of course, these are other pictures of different families where I stayed. And when I went back and was able to get pictures of them, because during the war you couldn't take pictures. Now they did take some. At this one family back over here a ways, I'll go back.
Well, why don't we leaf through these,
Well,
each page, and point out anything that noteworthy there?
well, these are just different members of the families when they got married, and these are their wedding pictures.
Yeah.
And this was one of the boys that was the Dutch boys that was staying in the barn with me. He was, after we got chased out that night, he was captured later by the Germans. But 2 of these other American boys was with him, and they was able to shoot their way out and rescued him. Mm-hmm. And he still got the handcuffs where they had him handcuffed. Mm-hmm. And of course, he's very thankful for that, because they really saved his life, because the Germans no doubt would have tortured and killed him after catching him. But he's still living today. In fact, he's been here to the United States and visited me once.
Oh, that's great.
And this was a girl that I stayed with her parents, and she also worked with the underground. And I've got a chance to visit her. And these are 2 of the first people who helped me in the underground, who were later, before the war was over, were killed.
Mm-hmm. By the Germans.
By the Germans, yes.
Mm-hmm.
This one was killed just 2 days before the war was over, and this one was killed about 2 months before the war was over. And this is the picture of the girl where I stayed with her dad, her folks. And this was a Dutchman that was staying at the same farm that I was staying at, was captured the night we had to leave. And the Germans later shot him for reprisals. Mm-hmm. And I got a picture of the memorial where he was killed as a memorial, standing there right along the highway, and they just stuck a big hole and just put them all in that hole. Mm-hmm. And after the war, the Dutch people dug them up and buried them in cemeteries.
Yeah.
But the memorial still stands there with their names on it. Mm-hmm. This was one of the boys that lived there, and after the Dutch war was over, the World War II, the Dutch had to go to the Dutch East Indies and fight. They had trouble down there, and he had to go there and fight for 3 years after the war ended over there.
Oh, my.
So he went through a lot. And this is a picture of a Dutchman that was escaped to England, and they trained him and parachuted him back into Holland.
He's a fellow that you pedaled a bicycle for.
Right.
Okay.
And dropped him back, parachuted back into Holland,
mm-hmm.
and to work with the underground. Now here's a picture. This picture was taken during the war with this family that I stayed in the barn, and all these pictures. And they hit them. They taped them on the bottom of the table. And they was very lucky when the Germans come in that night and took everything they had. And they threw hand grenades in the house and blew up a lot of the furniture and stuff, from the damage. And they never took that table. And they was able to retrieve those pictures after the war, and they still had them.
I notice you've all got Wooden shoes
Yeah,
on.
that's where we dressed. There's a coveralls we had on and wooden shoes. That's where we had to dress there and all. And there's the picture where I was ice skating.
Oh, there you were ice skating. And who was the girl you were
Well,
with?
she was one of those girls that lived there in that family, and her name was Faye, and that's, we were doing that so they could take our picture.
Yeah. You didn't know how to ice skate.
I know, I'd never ice skated before.
Oh, now here's the, you got a picture of the barn here?
No,
Let's
this,
see, we saw one in here somewhere. Where would that be?
well, I think it was back here where them horses were.
Okay. Maybe over here.
Here it is.
Okay.
Here's the barn, there's the house. They were just one building, they're connected.
Now you said the house and the barn are connected, and they,
Yeah, they just,
the cows are right in there in the barn?
cows right in there, and usually there's just a little hallway about 3 or 4 foot wide. And you step out of the cow stable and then in that little hallway and right into the kitchen.
And you take your shoes off?
You take your shoes off.
All right. Okay, I think that's,
Now, here's a picture. Here's the first boy that helped me when I landed in Holland. And he took me to this spot. He said, this field here was the spot where I came down. And,
now what about these crosses?
okay, those crosses are a cemetery there in Holland where 2 of the boys on my crew, the navigator and bombardier, were killed. And that's where they were buried till after the war, and then, since then they've been brought back.
Okay. Any more in here that we should look at? These pictures are kind of small.
Yes,
They
these,
probably won't show up as well as some of the others.
no, some of these are memorials where stones where people that I knew during the war had died, and I visited the cemeteries. And here's a picture of a windmill where I stayed for 2 days. See, people lived in those windmills, in most of them.
Oh,
That windmill maybe ground grain or pump water or whatever, and the people live in them, and that's their home as well as a place for business.
yeah.
And then those are just pictures of some of the grandchildren over there, and items about when I went back to Holland.
Yeah. Well, that's great. Now let's get those medals over there, Bud. And that citation there, get that over here.
Let's see that.
Okay, now let's
Well, my
explain
daughter-
what these are.
Well, my daughter made that up. They don't have them all on there, but they have the main medals. They made that up for me for Christmas and put those in there. Of course, there's the wings that I won when I completed gunnery school. Then you got your wings. And of course, this is just a little medal that I won, showed I was a radio operator and completed gunnery school. Here's the air medal, which I have an oak leaf cluster for it. In other words, it means that I got it twice.
There's your Purple Heart.
And in fact, that was awarded to my mother while I was shot down because they awarded to her bassoons because they didn't know I was alive. And they awarded it to my mother for me, you know. And of course, there's the Purple Heart. And then this is the medal that the Dutch government awarded me. And it's called the Resistance Memorial Cross. And that's for people of the resistance movement or the underground that fought over there for during the war against the Germans.
Yeah.
And I was awarded that medal also by the Queen of England. Authorized it.
The Queen of Holland.
Queen of Holland.
Yeah. And when did you get that?
I just got that about 5 years ago because the Dutch government on the 40th anniversary of the war decided to award these medals to the
Underground.
Dutch, to the underground. And all recipients that get that medal are entitled to a pension. Now, if I was a Dutchman, I'd be getting a pension for that.
Yeah. What have you got in there?
Well, that's just some of
Well,
the letters and
pictures.
pictures of when, this is what was made up by the Dutch government explaining who got the medal and what the medal was
Yeah,
for.
okay. What is that over there?
Okay, that's the citation that goes with that medal
Just hold that up, I think the front of it there.
from Holland,
Right here.
and that's the medal that I was a picture of the medal that I was awarded.
Yeah, now this is all in Dutch.
This is all in Dutch, but also I have a letter that was written in English to explain.
Explain it. Okay. All right, now, glad the Canadians rescued you just before the war was over. Is that right?
Right, on the 13th of April of 45.
And what happened on your rescue? What did they do?
Well, they treated me very, just like I was one of theirs. And it just so happened that the place that they were staying that night, that they came up through Holland and stayed there for the night, pitched their tents and everything, was a farm where I had stayed.
Mm-hmm.
And but at that time I was on the other side of the canal, about 2 miles from there. And the people where I was staying heard about the Canadians being there and took me over there. So I didn't have any trouble convincing the Canadians who I was, because the Dutch people where they was at also knew me. And so I didn't have any trouble that way. And in fact, they just took me in and gave me a big breakfast that morning. And they were just getting ready to move out.
Were they Canadian infantry?
Yes, and their commander was a colonel, and of course they asked me if I smoked, and I said yes, but I didn't have any cigarettes, and they took up different ones there, and I ended up with 5 packs of cigarettes that day, and I smoked every one of them that one day.
They haven't killed you yet.
And he told another officer to get me a drink, and they brought me out one of these big canteens about 2/3 full of rum. And he apologized to me, but he said that's all they had on the front lines. Well, I couldn't drink it, you know, but I thanked him for it anyway. But anyway, they took me with them in that day, because they were moving farther north, and I rode on the back end of a truck that had machine guns mounted on. And I had a German Luger with me that I had taken off of a German that I had killed, you know, but I was wanting to keep it for a souvenir. And of course they took that, they wanted to take that away from me, because still not knowing for sure who I might be.
Yeah.
See, I could, you know, I could always have been a German impersonator.
Yeah.
But anyway, he finally said, well, you keep the gun, but you give me the ammunition. So I took the clips out of the gun. I had 2 clips, and gave him the clips with the ammunition in it. And then that night, when they settled in again, why, he sent one of his officers with me in a jeep back to the southern part of Holland, where the English had control of an airfield. And of course, he gave me my clips back from my gun. And I went back there, and the next morning I flew from there to France, and that's where I came in contact with the American authorities. And then after a couple of days of briefing, which they really briefed you on, make you prove who you were, then I was on a boat on my way home.
What rank did you hold all this
I was a tech sergeant.
Tech sergeant. And you got back home, when did you get back home?
Well, it took 14 days to come home. That was the longest 14 days I ever spent in my life on a boat.
Did they notify your parents you were coming?
No, I was allowed to call when I got back to the States, and I called from Atlantic City, and that was the first my folks knew that I was all right.
Very shocked for them, wasn't it?
But 2 days later I was home.
Now, you got back home and you married?
I got married while they gave me a 60-day, what they call convalescence leave. It wasn't called a furlough. to report back to duty, which would be in Miami, Florida. And see, I got home in the day the war ended in Germany. I got home, and on that was May the 10th, and on June the 10th, my wife, my girlfriend then, but we got married on June the 10th, and we're still married.
How many children do you have?
We have 4 children. We have 2 boys and 2 girls.
And where are they?
One's living here in Cartersville at the present time.
What's his name or her name?
His name is Stephen, but he travels all over the country. In fact, at the present time, he's in Vancouver. But his house here is in Cartersville. I got a daughter and a son, another son that lives in Indianapolis. She's a school teacher and he's in the insurance business. And my youngest daughter lives in Anderson, and she's for several years was in charge of the Big Brothers Big Sisters program over there, and at the present time she's in charge of the Health Society, where they, I don't know hardly how to explain it, except it's where they people are in need help, battered women, and
do you have any grandchildren?
I have 1 granddaughter, 6 years old.
Now that's all. All those kids. Where does he live?
In Indianapolis.
You ever tell him these stories?
Well, it's a girl, but
no,
she's a little young to kind of comprehend what's going on.
Well, she's going to have this tape to look at.
Well, yeah.
Now, what have you been doing since you've been out of the service?
Well, I came back from the service, and of course I was born and raised on a farm, and I went into farming, and I still farm, but in '67 I started working at what used to be the First National Bank down here, which Bank One now, here in Cartersville, and I worked there 20 years and then retired. And during that time I still farm some, and I still live on the farm.
Still own the farm?
I still own the farm. It's a small farm, but it's a place for us to live, and we enjoy it.
All right. Well, let's take just another brief recess here. Bud, now, I noticed you had the Purple Heart. Did you have any serious wounds?
No, not really. I didn't have serious wounds. I had some shrapnel, but that was, to me, was more or less minor. But then I was presented with the Purple Heart, and but like I say, I think that's a medal that a lot of people received and didn't really deserve, including myself. And because I think of that as somebody being injured that really wounded. I mean, maybe lost a limb or lost their lives. You know what I mean? That medal should be for them, really. But they presented it to me, so that's.
Did you have to be taken to a medic at all?
No. In the first place, it wasn't safe to take to a doctor or to get medical care, but I wasn't that bad that I needed a doctor. Now, one boy on the crew was taken to a hospital. He had a broken arm, and the Germans found him the next day right away, and then he was taken prisoner. And he had this broken arm, and they never did do anything to it. When he come home, they had to operate on him, and then he had one arm shorter than the other.
Now, we got into this matter about the uniform. You had to get rid of that uniform, and that posed a kind of a danger that you would be taken as a spy if they found you. Would you comment on that?
At first, I never thought anything about it. I mean, I was just doing what the Dutch people told me.
Yeah.
And because I knew that they was trying to help me. But as time went on, and then when some of these resistance people began to get captured and killed, and then I got to thinking, well, you know, if I'm captured, what will they do with me? I didn't know whether they'd treat me as a spy or whether they would believe me that I was an American flyer or what. So it was always a constant worry that way that something might happen and you didn't know what would happen. But fortunately it didn't happen, so.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned you had a German Luger there that you shot at a German. And of course it's like any other serviceman, it's either you or the other guy. Did you ever have to use it to confront any Germans that you had to shoot?
Well, yes, in fact, that's how I got the gun. I mean, I had another Dutchman. Was okay, we was going to this place where I actually got liberated. Them people were friends. And we was going over there one evening just to visit for a little while. It was at night, of course. And we had to cross this little bridge on the canal. And, of course, I had no passport, see. I mean, I had nothing for an enemy.
Yeah.
And, but he was also a butcher. And we was going to go to this guy's house, and then he was going to stop back and do some, cutting some meat for a guy. And he had this butcher knife. And, of course, we were just going along. And I had a 45 with me then, American made gun.
Yeah.
But these two Germans stopped us. And, of course, we was talking a little bit of Dutch, and we knew what would happen. I mean, if they took us in or got to asking me for my identity and so forth, we'd be in trouble. So I just hit him with my shoulder and told him in Dutch, which they didn't understand, see, that we better kill him, because he knew I had a gun and I knew he had a knife. So he grabbed one with the knife and I shot the other one, and then we got out of there. And but that's how I got his gun. He had a German Luger, and I took it. And but that was the occasion where I got the gun.
Yeah.
And that was the closest I ever come being captured while I was over there.
It was right toward the end of the war, though.
Yeah, it was about 3 weeks before the end of the war.
Now, after the war, you visited Holland, and they'd come over here to see you. Tell us about those visits that you made over there and the people that would come here to see you.
Well, in 55, I went to Holland by myself, mainly to go back and, of course, visit and thank the people for what they'd done. And I had some communication with 2 or 3 families with letters after the war. But anyway, I went to where the last place I was, is where I stayed, and then that way I just kept going back. They knew who brought me to their place and so forth until I was able to find the first boy that helped me, which I never knew his name or nothing until then.
And how long did that take you?
Well, I was there a month.
Well,
of course, I didn't take me all that time to find them all, but I mean, and then to spend a little time
to visit
each
with them.
To visit with each one of them. Because there was about 70 places altogether that I had to go.
I'll be darned. Well.
And of course, some of them, well, they was all glad to see me. They figured they'd never see me again, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it was quite a feeling when...
Could you still speak Dutch when you...
Oh yeah, I can still speak a little of it yet today. Enough that I can make them understand me and I can understand them. I can't write it and I can't read it. But I can still speak it a little bit.
Now, you went back again after that, didn't you?
Well, then in 55, well, in 68, a brother and one of the boys and his sister that where I stayed came and visited us. And they spent 10 days at our place. And then in 77, my wife and I went together over to visit. And we got to visit the most of these people, but an awful lot of them had passed away, see.
And how long did you stay that time?
3 weeks. And then in 78, another family came to visit with us. And then over a period of the time, there's been like singles. One man that I stayed in the woods with came to visit. And another time there was a grandson and a friend of his that had came to the United States and hitchhiked all the way across the country and back and stopped and saw us. And another lady came that her son was over here as an exchange student up in southern part of Wisconsin. And she come to visit him, and then people brought her down to visit with us. And then another family came, same family that was in 78 came back again and brought one of their children with them. And there was another grandchild that from another family that was over here touring the country and stopped in and visited with us. So we had quite a few that came to see us.
I take it that you're carrying on correspondence too.
We still do. We get letters all the time, and once in a while phone calls back and forth. And then see, in 77, my wife and I went back over there, and then again just last year, in 90, in August, we went back over and visited another 3 weeks.
You're getting to know Holland pretty well.
Well, you're right. We've been, of course, they took us into part of Germany and Belgium and Luxembourg.
Are these all farm families for the most part?
Most of them are farm families. Of course, there's even more to visit today because the families, the children that I knew then that was around my age are married, so they've got families. So it makes a lot of running when you go over to try to visit everybody, and everybody wants you to come see them.
Yeah.
And but we was able to locate most of the people that way.
Do they treat you pretty royally?
Oh, they just treat you like you're a king. They're the best people there is. My wife she just can't believe it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I tell you, this has been a great interview, Bud, and we sure do thank you for coming down here today and telling us about this. And I hope that that one grandchild of yours will. We're going to give you, as I said, we're going to give you one copy of this tape.
Yeah, that'd be fine.
And you'll pass it down to the family, and the years to come, they'll talk about it.
I know back when the people from Holland come over to visit me, my folks, family appreciated that, you know, but was really interested. Because I would tell them things that happened over there, well, they didn't maybe believe it.
Yeah.
But then when somebody from where comes over and tells them it's the same thing, then they believe what happens. And a lot of the hardships that the people there went through, and people back here at home thought they had bad things with ration, but they didn't have nothing like what those people had.
Yeah. Well, thanks again. We really, that's been a great interview.
Thank you.